Wade Corrigan had spent 15 seasons chasing a number he never quite reached. This year, that changed in a way nobody on his crew saw coming. What started as a routine set of exploratory holes on a stretch of ground he nearly walked away from twice turned into something that stopped every geologist who looked at the data cold. Early estimates now put the possible value of what's sitting underneath his claim at around $120 million. If that number holds up under further testing, it will be the single largest strike of Wade's career and one of the biggest independent gold finds anyone on this claim has seen in years. But is the ground really hiding that much gold? Or is the real story still buried deeper than anyone realizes? Stick with us, because we're about to walk through every drill report, every lab result, and every twist that got Wade's team to this point. And if you're into gold mining stories that actually dig into the evidence instead of just the hype, go ahead and subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss what happens next. For most of the season, nobody expected this ground to do anything special. Wade's crew had worked the outer edge of the claim for years, pulling steady but unremarkable numbers, the kind that keep a small operation afloat without ever making headlines. That changed when Wade's lead geologist, a quiet, methodical woman named Priya Anand, pushed for a fresh round of exploratory drilling on a section of the property nobody had bothered to test in nearly a decade. Wade wasn't convinced it was worth the time or the diesel. Money was tight, the season was already half gone, and every hour spent drilling test holes was an hour not spent moving pay dirt through the wash plant. But Priya had a hunch, built on old survey notes and a gut feeling about the way the valley floor pitched toward an old creek bed. Wade gave her 3 days and 2 drill rigs. That was enough. The first few holes came back unremarkable, more of the same low-grade material the crew had grown used to. Then, on the 4th hole, something changed. The core sample pulled up showed a concentration of gold far higher than anything the crew had logged that season. At first, everyone assumed it was a fluke, a small isolated pocket that wouldn't repeat. So they drilled again, this time a few hundred feet away. The second sample came back strong too, then a third, then a fourth. Each new hole wasn't just confirming that gold was present, it was suggesting the deposit might run continuously beneath a much larger footprint than anyone had guessed. Wade later said watching those lab reports come in one after another was the first time all season he felt something shift in his gut, the sense that this might not be an ordinary vein. To make sure they weren't fooling themselves, Wade brought in an outside laboratory to run a second, independent set of tests on the same samples. That's a step a lot of small operations skip, partly because of cost and partly because most crews are confident enough in their own equipment. Wade wasn't willing to take that risk with numbers this big. When the second lab's results came back, closely matching the first round, the crew's confidence went from cautious optimism to something closer to real excitement. Priya was careful to remind everyone, repeatedly, that a handful of strong drill holes does not confirm a deposit. Gold zones can pinch out without warning, grade can taper off just as fast as it appears, and a full picture only comes from sustained testing over time. Wade understood that, but he also understood that ignoring signals this consistent would have been its own kind of mistake. With the drill data pointing towards something larger, Priya turned her attention to the geological history of the property, trying to answer the question that mattered most. Where did all this gold actually come from? She pulled old topographic surveys, compared them against satellite imagery, and cross-referenced the rock layers pulled from each new core sample. What she found pointed toward an old, long-buried river channel that once cut through the property thousands of years ago, before the landscape shifted and buried it under layers of gravel, silt, and rock. Ancient river channels are notorious in placer mining circles because gold is heavy. As rivers move, gold particles settle into the lowest points of the channel and stay there even after the river itself dries up or changes course. If Wade's crew really had stumbled onto a buried channel like that, it would explain why the gold kept showing up across multiple drill holes instead of in one isolated spot. Still, a theory is not proof, and Wade's team knew that better than most. To test the idea further, they brought in a ground imaging crew equipped with resistivity and magnetometry equipment technology that lets geologists build a rough picture of what's underground without digging a single hole. The scans took the better part of a week to complete and process, and when the images finally came back, they lined up almost perfectly with Priya's channel theory. The imaging revealed a long, curving formation running beneath several sections of the claim, consistent with the shape of an old riverbed. It wasn't a single small target. It stretched across a much wider area than the initial drill holes had covered. For a crew that had spent years fighting for modest, steady numbers, that image alone was enough to change the entire mood at camp. Faced with a picture that kept getting bigger instead of smaller, Wade made the call to shift the season's entire strategy. Up to that point, the plan had been to keep working the known ground conservatively and finish the season without any major surprises. Now, with a possible ancient channel running underneath multiple sections of the claim, Wade decided the smarter move was to commit the bulk of the season's remaining budget toward chasing it properly. That meant pulling equipment away from lower priority ground, bringing in an extra excavator, and pushing the wash plant crew into longer shifts to keep pace with the material coming out of the new cut. It also meant taking on real financial risk. Fuel, parts, and extra labor don't come cheap. And if the channel theory turned out to be wrong, Wade would be left with a much smaller season than if he'd simply played it safe. He called a full crew meeting before making it official. Around a folding table covered in maps and lab printouts, Wade laid out exactly what they knew, what they didn't, and what the plan going forward would look like. He didn't promise anyone a jackpot. Instead, he told them plainly that the data was strong enough to justify a real push, but that nothing was guaranteed until they got material through the wash plant and into the cleanup sluice. Some of the crew were skeptical, having chased big theories before that fizzled out after a few weeks of expensive digging. Others were fully on board, pointing to the consistency of the drill results as something they hadn't seen in years on this ground. In the end, the decision came down to Wade, and he decided to trust the data. The first major excavation into the target zone started on a cold, overcast morning, with two excavators working in tandem to strip overburden as carefully as possible. Priya insisted on slow, methodical digging rather than the usual push for volume, wanting every layer logged and every sample properly labeled before it got mixed into the pay dirt pile. It made for a frustratingly slow start, and more than one crew member grumbled about lost production time. Then, a little past midday, the excavator operator called out that he'd hit a layer of compact, dark gravel sitting just above what looked like bedrock, the classic signature placer miners look for. Material from that layer got fed straight into the wash plant, and everyone gathered near the sluice to watch the first cleanup. What came off that first run stunned even the crew members who've been doing this for over a decade. Fine gold traced almost the entire length of the riffles, with several larger pieces caught near the top. It wasn't a jackpot cleanup by any means, but it was clearly a step above anything they'd pulled that season, and it lined up with exactly the kind of material Priya had predicted based on the channel theory. Wade kept a level head in front of the crew, reminding everyone that one strong cleanup doesn't make a season, let alone a $120 million deposit. But privately, he later admitted it was the first moment all year he let himself believe the numbers Priya had been talking about might actually be real. Over the following weeks, the crew kept working the target zone, moving methodically along the path the ground imaging survey had mapped out. Cleanups stayed consistent, not spectacular every single time, but steady in a way that mattered more to Priya than any single big haul. Consistency across multiple locations is what turns a promising anomaly into something a geologist is willing to put real numbers behind. By the midpoint of that stretch, Wade's team had enough data, drill results, imaging, and actual production numbers to sit down and build an early estimate of what the deposit might actually be worth. Combining grade estimates with the mapped footprint of the ancient channel, that early figure landed right around $120 million in gold still sitting in the ground. Wade was careful about how that number got talked about, both on site and later when word started spreading beyond the claim. He knew from experience how quickly an early estimate can turn into an inflated headline if it gets repeated enough times without context. An early estimate is exactly that, early. It's built on the data available at the time, and it can shrink just as easily as it can grow once more of the ground gets tested. Mining analysts who reviewed summaries of the find echoed the same caution, pointing out that the real value of any deposit depends on more than raw ounces in the ground. Extraction costs, recovery rates, and the practical difficulty of mining a buried channel all factor into what a number like that actually means in practice. Even with that caution built in, word of what was happening on Wade's claim started to spread through the small-scale mining community, first through word of mouth among nearby claim holders, then through mining forums where people compared notes on drill results and imaging techniques. Several independent geologists who'd followed similar ancient channel discoveries elsewhere weighed in, noting that the pattern Wade's team had documented, consistent drill hits across a mapped, curving formation, was exactly the kind of signature that had preceded major discoveries in other regions. That didn't confirm anything on its own, but it added weight to the idea that Wade's crew might genuinely be sitting on something significant rather than chasing a mirage. As the season moved into its final stretch, Wade and Priya began planning the next phase, a more focused push into the deepest and richest-looking section of the map channel. That meant investing in additional drilling to confirm depth and grade before committing the heaviest equipment to a full-scale cut. It also meant accepting that answers wouldn't come quickly. Deep placer deposits take time to properly evaluate, and rushing the process risks both wasted money and, more importantly, the safety of the crew working the ground. Wade made it clear in every conversation with his team that patience mattered more than excitement at this stage, even as the numbers coming back kept pointing in a promising direction. What makes this story stand out isn't just the size of the number attached to it. It's the way Wade's crew got there, refusing to treat early signals as confirmed fact, running independent tests to check their own work, and building the case for a major discovery step by careful step instead of jumping straight to a headline. That approach doesn't always make for the flashiest updates, but it's the difference between a real discovery and a rumor that falls apart under scrutiny. Whether the final numbers end up matching that early $120 million estimate or coming higher or lower once every hole is drilled and every sample tested is still an open question. What isn't in question is that Wade Corrigan's ground has gone from an afterthought to one of the most closely watched claims of the season. So where does that leave things? The channel is mapped, the early cleanups have been strong, and the geology keeps lining up in Wade's favor. But placer gold has humbled plenty of confident miners before, and everyone on this crew knows that the only number that matters in the end is the one that comes out of the ground, not the one on a spreadsheet. Wade says he's not thinking about a career-defining season just yet. He's thinking about the next drill hole and the one after that. What do you think? Is Wade Corrigan sitting on a genuine $120 million gold deposit? Or is there still a chance this ancient channel theory falls apart before the season's out? Let us know your take in the comments. And if you want to keep following this story as new drill results and cleanup numbers come in, make sure you're subscribed with notifications turned on so you don't miss the next update.